All right, so in here I can just hit paste, and there you go. Reference page, pretty much done. So that is a really handy way to do it. Now, one of the things that is really helpful about this is doesn't that save so much time, especially if you were looking at keeping track of, 650 articles that you looked at. Having reference information on those would take you forever to do. But it does have random little errors, like there's an open parens that I just highlighted. I don't know if you can see that in this LOH reference. It's just a random open parens there. I don't know what that's for. So you definitely want to scan through this and find the errors. All right. So the other thing that's really helpful about this is now the next stage in trying to keep track of all of your studies. Now that we have these imported into Microsoft Word, one way to deal with that is to go ahead and put those into a table. I'm going to select all and use the insert table convert text to table function. I want to do it with paragraph marks. And now each one of our references is one row in the table. We can make that prettier. I can go ahead and get rid of the double spacing because this is just for our record keeping, not for APA. Then we can go ahead and create two columns to the side of this. I'm going to make those a little bit smaller. One can be your study ID number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. The next one can be whether or not you actually used it in the final analysis, whatever you want to put, or why you rejected it. No data. Used. Wrong. Qualitative study, etc. Use. So you can keep track of which ones you actually use and which ones you don't use, and have a clear rationale at the end for why each one was either kept or gotten rid of. Now, granted, for this class, I'm not requiring you guys to really go through and look at every possible article that's out there and choose all of the ones that would work, but I want you to at least know some ways to deal with that level of data management, because that level of data is just massive. So doing something like this will give you a way to keep a clear spreadsheet, especially if you're looking at 670 studies. You're going to have pages and pages and pages of these, but at least it's going to be more manageable, especially if you divide it over, 3 or 4 people, then everybody codes and recodes some. So you can number them. You can say, I'm going to take numbers 1 through 200. You take 201 to 400 is a lot easier than anything else. Everybody's working on the same list of articles. And then having a clear way to keep track of which ones you chose to use, which ones you didn't, and a brief idea about why you didn't keep those, why certain articles were rejected, didn't meet criteria X or Y, etc. Didn't provide enough data. It can be really helpful in keeping track. So the next thing is the data. So now you've gone through and you've coded all of these articles. So the database that I would generally say to use would be Excel. Most people already have it on their computers. Even most Mac people have Excel these days. And it is, because it is one of the most common database programs, a spreadsheet program, it imports easily into other programs. So it's very easy to import from Excel into SPSS. It's very easy to import from Excel into comprehensive meta-analysis, etc. It's fairly easy to use, and it has a very gentle learning curve. So there's not a lot of stuff you need to know in order to be able to create a spreadsheet in Microsoft Excel. The primary con I have with Excel is that because there isn't much inherent structure to it, it doesn't limit you much. You can create incredibly unwieldy databases to deal with. So making sure that you create a logical structure to start with that is as simple as it can be is going to help you in the long run over creating a large unwieldy structure. So with that, I'll pop over to Excel for a minute. I'll take it. So basic database structure that I would suggest. Let's see if I can put it in here. There we go. I would suggest having, and this is necessarily the only, this is by no means the only way to do it. It's not even necessarily the best way to do it. It's just a personal preference. If you come up with something else, that's fine too. So in the bottom of the Excel workbook that's open, you'll see I've created two separate sheets, one called effect size data and one called study and sample data. In the effect size data, and for this one I just created 3 random effect sizes you might be looking at. I would include things like a column to put your study ID in so that you can keep track of which study that effect size goes to. Always a good thing to have. Something, and for each of you, for each one of the groups this time, you have some sort of grouping variable. For the sex offender treatment group, this would be whether it was a community-based intervention or an intervention during incarceration. For the generalized anxiety disorder group, this would be whether they were in psychotherapy or pharmacy, what sort of treatment you were looking at. For the religion group, this would be whether it was a physical or a mental health benefit that they were looking at. So I would use that in order to group or further delineate which one of your effect sizes you're looking at. Then I would create in here columns for your various effect sizes that you're coming across in the studies that you're doing. I've color-coded them just to make it easier to figure out. So all the things that are in this pinkish-orange color all go together. That's for a standardized mean difference. We have a treatment mean, a treatment standard deviation, and a treatment N. Then we have a control mean, a control standard deviation, and a control N. And then we have this direction variable. And in that, I'm referring to whether you expect, like for positive variables, the direction would be positive, that you'd want there to be an increase in positive variables. Whereas if you were measuring something negative like depression, you'd be hoping for a decrease in depression, so you'd have a negative draft. So the direction is going to be either negative or positive, and it's going to depend on what type of variables you're measuring. If you're measuring quality of life, it's going to be positive. If you're measuring depression, it's going to be negative. That you're expecting the treatment group is going to have lower scores on depression than control. But for quality of life, we're expecting the treatment group to have higher than control. So that direction variable comes in there. The next one is I've colored it in blue just to keep it clear that those all go together. And that's the treatment group, event N, and the non-event N for the treatment group. So like for the sex offender treatment study, if we had people in sex offender treatment and people who didn't have treatment, the event N would be the number of people who did have a reoffense, and the non-event N would be the people who did not have a reoffense. Control group would be our, again, no treatment group, and we'd have an event N or an event N, depending on how you want to spell that, and a no event N. So that's those 4 cells you'd see in a 2x2 table. So did they did or they didn't for each one of your groups. The last set of effect size data I put in here were for a correlation We need the value of the correlation, so 0.63, the n size associated with it, and the direction. Again, whether it's something you would expect to see or would want to see a positive correlation for, or something you want to have a negative correlation for. And that just depends on the data that you're looking at. But putting in that direction for the correlation is going to help us keep that straight. So if the level of religiosity or spiritual being was significantly related to higher levels of depression, that would go counter to what the religion group is looking for. So we'd expect to see a negative correlation and not a positive one. So keeping that in mind. There are tons more sets of these that you can put in. I would suggest that you color code them like that, so you know if what you're doing is filling in orange cells, you need to fill in all 7 of those orange cells for that study. But you could have, study 1 could have data on here, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, positive. But study 2 could have data down here. Nope. And then your third study could have data here. Fine. In the end, we can create effect sizes out of all of those. This just helps us create the effect size data that we're going to need to create the effect sizes. So just because you have one set doesn't mean that all of your studies have to have that same data. By putting in the various effect sizes that you're coming across, then you can fill them in as you go. That you need to have all of the data in at least one of those sets in order to create an effect size for that study. Does that make sense? All right. And looking through the textbook and the online calculators, you can quickly determine what other information you might need in order to create an effect size. So that can be extremely handy. So if you're finding that you're getting some other information like a t-value and the level of significance associated with it and the n size, then you might create that as another set and color it, I don't know, yellow. So that you know that those 3 are good together, etc. I've added in, and I posted this spreadsheet on the Moodle site, and there's notes down here just to sort of clue you into what I was thinking as I was creating this. And that you can go ahead and add in other effect sizes as needed. But as far as sharing files, really any sort of cloud server will work for sharing files across a group. But I do, at this point, given the level of technology we have these days, I would highly suggest a cloud server rather than trying to pass documents around and sticking things in people's boxes, which would just be crazy at this point. Back in the day, that was the best we could do, but now it's very nice that there can be a localized file that you can access. Again, Dropbox, you get 2 gigabytes for free, which is helpful. It syncs automatically, which is really helpful, but do be careful because you can change other people's information. And one of the nice things, if you haven't noticed it yet, is that it does save previous versions. So if you accidentally saved over something, you went and just copied over an old code sheet, you can go into the Dropbox. If you click on it and view it on the web, you can go back and view a previous version of it, which can be really helpful. At least I have a bad tendency to type over previous versions of documents and then forget to save them as a different version. And of course, it shares very easily to the Dropbox.